Good evening, council members. My name is Nick Livesey, the chair of the zoning board. I think I've been doing it for 10 or so years. I'm not sure, maybe more, maybe less, but a little while. And so primarily I just want to answer questions that you folks have tonight. But before that, I will give you a little update as to what it is that we do. And I think wrapped up in that is what we do not do, so that we're clear about that. So there are only three things that the zoning board handles. We handle variance requests, which we call appeals. We handle appeals from the Village Review Committee and Planning Board, and I'm lumping those together as one. And we hear appeals of code officer decisions. So that's it. So what's wrapped up in each of those three? So variance requests are a request to deviate from a dimensional requirement or standard in the ordinance. So that's like a setback. We can't change the use that's allowed on a property. And there are many, many other standards, and we can't deviate from those or approve a deviation. So it's just a deviation from a dimensional requirement. And the framework is spelled out in our ordinance, and that flows from state law. So there's not a lot of fluctuation there. The second category of things I mentioned were appeals from the planning board or from the Village Review Committee. And I put those together because they're a appellate review that we have. So what is an appellate review? That means that we don't ask people to come and talk to us and then sit there and judge the matter based on the standards how we think is most reasonable. So it's not my job to listen to it and say, you know, the planning board made this decision, but I think it should have come out differently. That's not the standard for an appellate review. What we're tasked with doing is looking at the record that was before the planning board and asking the question, could a reasonable person have reached the conclusion that they did? So it's sort of a deferential standard. And if we think that a reasonable person could have, then we're obligated to uphold that decision. And then finally, the code officer, that's a de novo review. What does that mean? That means that we do get to sort of act and apply our judgment. So we listen to the facts, we look at the standards that the code officer was tasked with applying, and we say, what should the result be based on the ordinance? So those are the three things that we do. And wrapped up in that is what we don't do. We don't sort of sit there and play zoning board or planning board number two. It's not a redo, for example. And then in the variances, it's a very narrow set of things that we look at and can allow for a deviation from the standard. That's it.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Hicks.
I just wondered if you might just give your take on how the past year and a half has been going for your board. You've had probably some of the tougher, I guess, presentations or cases, I guess you would call them, that you've had to go through and review. I'm hearing from constituents about the process, and I think a lot of it is that folks don't quite know what the appeal board is, and your explanation was good. I just wondered your take on how it's been going. What do you need to feel like the public understands what you're supposed to be doing?
So hopefully people may not understand what our responsibility is at the time an appeal is filed or when they walk through the door. But we do try to take time at all of our meetings to explain sort of what the process is, what our role is, and what it's not. That can be frustrating for people. And one thing that's inherent in any appeal that I've been involved with, maybe a variance aside, we call those appeals, but they're kind of a request for variance, but an appeal where somebody is filing an appeal. So you have somebody that has obtained a decision, and either they're challenging a decision, like somebody got a permit and they're challenging it, or they were denied a permit and they're challenging. So somebody's going to be unhappy no matter what we do. If we uphold an appeal or if we deny an appeal, somebody will be disappointed. So I think that's just unfortunately the way that the results will work. Hopefully people will at least appreciate that we try to run a fair and open process. And that's really the best that we can do is apply the process that's set out for us in the ordinance, try to apply it fairly, allow people to address us, and then make a decision. But you can be confident that somebody will be disappointed when we're done. As far as what would help, so we have the way our ordinance is structured, it contemplates 5 full-time members and I think 4 associate members or something along those terms. And it's impossible to fill those seats. And so the ordinance is also structured to require that there be 5 members present to conduct a meeting. So we have 5 members right now. We're lucky to have 5. And I mean, I work full-time. I travel a lot for work. I've got small kids, and well, they're not small anymore, but I've got kids that need to be driven around now all over the place. And it takes time. And so to find a time when all 5 of us can meet, it can take a few weeks to get that scheduled. And that's a delay for somebody. So a suggestion would be to take a look at the ordinance and consider whether or not a quorum of 5 is needed, or whether you could have a quorum of 4, and you could still require 3, majority vote of 3. There's different ways to sort of play this out, but it would be a suggestion that might help in the absence of finding more people who are willing to volunteer their time to be criticized for decisions they make.
We feel your pain.
Can I do a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Are there any other ordinances that you would like us to take a look at or consider reviewing?
Well, I mean,
you don't have to answer right now, but I'm just thinking,
Yeah, so from a quorum perspective, I'm not sure that it's necessarily valuable to go and try to find models. There are only so many different permutations. The state law sets a minimum standard that needs to be met in terms of quorums and number of members. I don't know it off the top of my head. We far exceed that. And so I think that there are some changes that could be made procedurally that would help. So not having to have all 5 members, you could have, say, 4. Other changes, if you want to consider them, and this is not an action necessarily for your body, but for the town planning staff, for example, it would be to improve some of the procedural guidelines or requirements that we have for how appeals are handled. So one of the things that I find that's frustrating, we'll get an appeal, it's scheduled, the materials are on the agenda, we get to look at that, it's great, and then all of a sudden we get a flurry of additional submissions, and they come right up until like when you're sitting in here, and that's really it's not good for anybody. It doesn't help our decision making, it doesn't help the public in terms of their understanding of what's going on. So it's not too much to ask that if somebody files an appeal and then somebody wants to comment, they definitely should be able to, but maybe not indefinitely up until the time of decision.
Great. I see the manager taking notes, so thank you.
I just kind of say one thing.
Yeah.
Just one point. I just wanted to point out that the Zoning Board of Appeals is actually in the town charter. The format of it is set up in that, so it's not quite as easy as changing an ordinance, unfortunately.
Is that in there too, the quorum part?
Yeah, the 5 quorum is, and I just looked, is in that part of it. Not to say that it can't be changed, but it's a much more complicated process than just changing an ordinance, unfortunately. But I can concur. I've been here for 25 years, and we've never had a full board of the ZBA, so it is a challenge.
Thank you, Clerk. Councilor Epdegraff, did you have a comment?
Yes. Chair Livesey, I have, over the last year, attended or Zoomed to all of your meetings. Congratulations on handling a very tight, succinct, well-focused meeting. People do, particularly on variances, do expect you to rejudicate the whole process, and that's not what you are about. I also agree with you about late submissions. I haven't been on the planning board for years, but that was a challenge with the planning board too. You can't sit in a room and get something handed to you and expect to be able to understand and apply what is coming. So thank you very much for that idea. And finally, thank you and all of your board members. Some of these challenges have been very difficult, but you have handled them, all of you, professionally. You followed up. The minutes following are complete, and I'm very impressed with your work. Thank you.
Well, thanks.
Counselor Watson.
What I would suggest is that you, as chair of the committee, submit a request to the town council listing the things that need to be addressed. You have the particular knowledge of what those should be and how they should be handled. That would be of great assistance to the town, and in fact, I'm doing that process with TV3 now as far as guidelines and the council charge. But you and your committee hold this unique, if you will use the term, ability to know and have the knowledge of the exact needs that you need to have changed, especially where the town clerk is explaining that this is also covered under the town charter. So that data that you could provide us would be of great assistance, but I think that has to come from you and your committee.
We can do it as long as we don't get a homework assignment in return.
I'm not going to guarantee anything.
Any other questions from council? All right. Thank you, Chair, very much
Yeah,
for
thank
your
you. Have a good
service.
evening.
We really appreciate it.